Welcome back, Biology 104. Today we're going to be covering the echinoderms notes, and these are pretty short. So for our deuterostomates, our classification here, which would include chordates and starfish, our domain is going to be Eukarya, kingdom is Animalia, phylum is Echinodermata. There are 5 classes in the phylum Echinodermata. It's going to be the class Crinoidea, Echinoidea, Ophiuroidea, Asteroidea, and Holothuriidea. Those are our 5 classes of Echinodermata. So some example organisms that we'll look at. For Crinoidea, we have the sea lily. You can see why they have that name. For our Echinoidea, we have sea urchins and sand dollars. And then for Ophiuroidea, we have what's called a brittle star, which basically looks like a starfish, except the legs are much longer and skinnier. Our next class is Asteroidea, which is going to be our what is preferred to be called sea stars because they're not fish. The name starfish can be a little bit misleading. And then our last class is Holothuriidea, which will include sea cucumbers, which they literally look like a cucumber. So if we go through some of the characteristics for our Echinodermata, they're going to exhibit pentamerous radial symmetry. And we'll show you what that looks like, but penta is 5, and radial symmetry would be when it's like from the top down, you can split it in a bunch of different ways, and it's symmetrical on both sides. Pentamerous, you could have 5 lines of symmetry there. And that is in the adults. In the larvae, it'll be bilateral, and they call that bipinnaria. Echinoderms, they have an endoskeleton with calcareous plates called ossicles, and the surface of their bodies are going to be covered with little spines. Echinoderms have a water vascular system that helps them move, feed, and also exhibit gas exchange. They have tube feet, which are going to help them move and hold on to objects, especially when trying to pry open a clam, for example, and feed. Adults will lack heads, brains, and segmentation. Their circulatory system is reduced, but the digestive system is complete, and the excretory system is absent. And we'll look through some pictures of all these things. So for that bipinnaria, that's the starfish larva, and you see that bilateral symmetry. You split it down the middle, symmetrical on both sides. And then on the right here, we have a sea star exhibiting that pentamerous radial symmetry. So you take any arm of the sea star, looking at it from the top down, and you create a line to bisect it there, right in the middle, and both sides are going to be a mirror image of each other. Or if we create a line here, then both sides are going to be a symmetrical mirror image of each other. So as long as you follow the middle of any of the arm all the way across, then both sides will be symmetrical, and that's why they call it pentamerous radial symmetry. For their water vascular system, that's going to be how they move on the sea floor and look around for clams to eat or move from one place to the next. And it's also how they will exhibit their gas exchange. So water enters the water vascular system through what's called the madreporite. And the madreporite will be on the arboreal side in the starfish, and water will pull through the madreporite, and then it goes through something called a stone canal. From there, it gets to the ring canal, and then it can actually go into the arms through what's called the radial canals. And that's what's actually going to create the motion for the movement of the starfish, which is really cool. The echinoderms and the chordates are deuterostomates, and the deuterostomes, what that means, well, think about the little prefix there, deutero and proto. Those come from Greek words. Deuteros means second, protos means first. And what it's referring to is the formation of the mouth. The stome part means mouth, so deuterostome would be second mouth. And that means the mouth will form secondarily during the embryonic development. So see this little image here, the blastopore, this opening will become the anus, and then the mouth will form later. So the mouth forms second, deuterostome. That's how you can remember the difference. So protostome would be the mouth forms first, and it means the blastopore, as in the embryonic development, that's going to become the mouth first. Protos, stomos, or stoma, mouth first. So we'll look through these classes and look at their characteristics. So the first class is the Asteroidea, and that is the starfish. And again, it's really better to use the name sea star because starfish makes you think it's a fish or something, and it's not. So the two sides of them, you're going to have the oral side, which has the mouth, and then the aboral side is the side opposite the mouth, which in this case will have the madreporite in the Asteroidea class, as well as the anus on the aboral side, and then the oral side will have the mouth and the umbilical grooves, which run under each arm, and then they have the spines that stick out on the surface. The umbilical groove, that's a V-shaped channel that you can't really see from the image. Maybe in the next few images you might be able to see it better. And that runs all the way down the oral side of each arm. It comes out from the central mouth that you can barely see there in the very middle. And that's going to house rows of tube feet that are going to help it grip and feed and move on the sea floor. And that would be controlled by that water vascular system that is feeling the inside of the sea star and helping it hold its pressure. So starfish are going to have 5 arms or rays that radiate from that central disc. Some can have more than that, but that's normally what it's going to be. Starfish exhibit regeneration, and very powerfully. If they lose an arm, then it can actually regrow into an entire new sea star. And they call that autonomy when they are the ones who decide to throw off an arm. So they can voluntarily choose to cast off an arm if a predator's chasing them. Then the predator can get the arm that they dropped, and then they can escape. It can also be used as a form of asexual reproduction because if they lose an arm, then it's capable of regenerating into a new sea star. So these are very resilient organisms. So there's what that regeneration looks like. You'll notice when it's being split, as long as whatever comes off has part of the central disc, then it can grow into a new starfish. If it's just the end of an arm gets bitten off and then it falls off somewhere, it won't grow into a new starfish. It's got to have part of that central disc. So it could be split in half, any way you think of, and it will develop into a new starfish. So here's what their feeding looks like. They have the ability to evert their stomachs. So they use their arms to pry open the adductor muscles that would hold a clam or an oyster shut, and then they throw up their stomach out into the clam so that they can start to digest the inside of the clam on that soft tissue. So for the external anatomy, we looked at the umbilical groove, and that's under each arm. And within each groove, there are tube feet, which you can see better in this image. And that plays a major role, especially in feeding, so that they can use those to pry open clams. So here in this image, they're showing the ossicles, which are the plates that are under the epidermis. And what that does, it creates their form and their skeleton. The spines protrude upward through the epidermis, as you can see in this image. What the arrow is pointing at there is the pedicellariae, and for that, those are little pinchers. And what they do is they prevent things from settling on the sea star. And this is very relatively high magnification to be able to see these. These are very, very tiny. Here it's showing you the madreporite on the aboral side here. The madreporite is on the opposite side of the mouth in the sea stars, and it's a different structure. It's not the mouth. That's not what they're going to be feeding through. That's where they're pulling water into their water vascular system through. And here's just an image of them crawling on the seafloor. So our next class is going to be the Ophiroidea, and this is the brittle stars. These are very similar to sea stars, except that their arms are very slender, and they don't have the suction function on their tube feet. So they're called brittle because their arms are long and brittle looking. The madreporite is located on the same side as the mouth. It's on the oral surface as well, instead of, as we see in the sea stars, where the madreporite is on the aboral surface. So that's on the opposite side. So those are some differences there. For the Ophiroidea, we call them the brittle stars, of course, because their arms are long and slender. They do not have that suction feet. And then the madreporite is in the oral surface. So if you remember that, those are the big differences. And they do not possess an intestines or an anus. Next class would be the Echinoidea. This would be your sea urchins and sand dollars, which are really cool organisms. They lack arms, but the pentamerous arrangement is still apparent. Right? If you look at the sand dollar, you still have these 5 branches coming out. Sand dollars form something called a test, which is where their ossicles fuse together. The test of a sand dollar is its exoskeleton, and that is made of calcium carbonate plates. And it's actually covered, if you've ever felt one when they're alive, they have this velvet texture to their surface, and that is the little hair-like spines when they're alive. But when they die, they become bleached, and it gives that bleached star-patterned skeleton that you see when you find them on the shore somewhere after they've been dead for a while. So that test is just for protection. The holes in the pattern that you see, those are actually pores for tube feet used for breathing, feeding, and movement, which is pretty neat. So for the sea urchin, on the inside, their mouth and teeth create this structure that has been named Aristotle's lantern. And this is because Aristotle once wrote, he said, the mouth apparatus of the urchin is continuous from one end to the other, but to outward appearances it is not so, but looks like a horned lantern with the panes of the horn left out. So this lantern is the mouth of the sea urchin. It's a 5-toothed structure, and it can be used for scraping algae, boring into rocks, and eating. And it is on the underside of the urchin, and it has 5 powerful calcium carbonate teeth that can move and allow the urchin to graze, which is pretty cool. And here's what a lantern beside Aristotle's lantern looks like, and you can see the obvious similarities. And this is just a little anatomical drawing for you to kind of see the different parts. But they have muscles, they have these really strong teeth, and the calcareous plates that allow them to move that food and break it down as it moves into the esophagus. Really cool little animals there. Next class would be the Holothuriidea, and that would be the sea cucumbers. And they do look like little cucumbers in the ocean. Their bodies, when you do the dissection on these, they feel really slimy. For whatever reason, students are more grossed out, I guess, by the sea cucumbers than anything else we dissect, it seems like. Just for whatever reason, the texture and the way they look is kind of, if you don't do a lot of dissections, it can be a little disturbing. But the skeleton for these only has a few ossicles. They do have tentacles, and that's around their mouths. And they do still use tube feet for locomotion, but in the sea cucumbers, they're much slower than your sea stars and brittle stars. They have a really cool capability called evisceration. Almost like, a squid using ink. But for this, what happens is if they get threatened, they shoot out of their mouth their internal organs. Or in some, they might shoot it out of their anus. And they literally just spray out their internal organs. It scares away predators, and then they can pull it back in. So here's an image of what that looks like. they call them Cuvarian threads that fall out of their body and can help scare away predators. Next class would be the Crinoidea, and that would be the sea lily. You see, it looks like a little lily growing off the seafloor, but this is an animal. But it really looks like a plant when you look at it. There are many fossilized species, but they have been around since the Cambrian. Here's a deep sea dive, or a sea dive, where you can see it at night, what it looks like. So then to identify from this image, because your notes have these to identify, A down here, if you want to pause, see if you can name these 5 different classes and the example organism, and then you can hit play and see if you get them right. But A right here, that's going to be the sea lily, Crinoidea. B is going to be the sea star, Asteroidea, or starfish. C is going to be the sea cucumber, and the class, would be the Holothuriidea. And then D is going to be the brittle star, Ophiuroidea, for the class name. And then E is going to be the sea urchin, which is the Echinoidea. And that would be the end of our notes. And in the lab, we'll be dissecting a sea cucumber, and this would be the internal structure of that sea cucumber. So you can see how it is a little bit, something about it, it's a little bit disturbing when you do the dissection on it. But anyway, that's what it looks like, and we'll get to cut into this in our lab. Thank you.